All right, this is the podcast for notes for genetic disorders. Please take notes on your notes outline. We're going to start with sickle cell anemia. If you do not have the notes outline or access to a printer, just take notes on a separate piece of paper. For each of the disorders that we do, there are 12 of them total. You need to know basically what it is, like how would I describe it or define it. How is it inherited? Is it dominant? Is it recessive? Is there a certain chromosome that gets affected by it? Is it sex-linked or is it autosomal? Symptoms, is there treatment? And then just sometimes we might have something else that's interesting for another thing to know. So the first thing we're going to do is take the notes, is for sickle cell anemia. So in what is it? Basically you're writing down everything that is red into your box. You're going to have to write a little bit small. But for sickle cell anemia, you can abbreviate red blood cells, as long as you remember what RBCs stand for. Like maybe write it up on the side somewhere. But basically, the red blood cells, as you can see right here, they're supposed to look like a jelly-filled donut. However, in sickle cell anemia, they don't. They look like a sickle shape. And what these red blood cells do is take the oxygen and transport that oxygen throughout your blood and throughout your body. Well, in sickle cell anemia, they're not shaped like that. They're shaped as a sickle, as you can see in the picture right there by the second arrow. And so obviously that shape change does not allow the red blood cell to carry the oxygen very efficiently. So what happens in the bloodstream, as you can see in the top picture, they get stuck in the bloodstream, and they cause lots of pain. We'll get to the symptoms in a minute. So how is it inherited? This is recessive. So all you need is like 2 little A's, and you can get sickle cell anemia. It's caused by a mutation. A mutation is an error in the DNA, which will be our next unit. And this mutation, this mistake, happens in the hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is part of the red blood cell that is carrying the oxygen around. So the 3 symptoms that you need to write down on your notes outline are clogged capillaries, as you saw in the picture previously, swelling of joints, because those capillaries are getting clogged in the bloodstream, it causes your joints in certain areas of the body to get swelled up. And because you're not getting the oxygen around your body efficiently, you can get short of breath. You do not have to write what is small font on your notes, but just some side symptoms that you might also have is you get tired, your chest could hurt, you can get pain and leg ulcers, you can have a heart attack, aching bones, your liver might not function properly, you can get headaches and convulsions. And you can see in the pictures the swelled joint and these things that can happen to your skin. Treatment is to get a blood transfusion, so that's going to the hospital and getting blood. In your box for other things to know, if you have sickle cell anemia, you do not get malaria. And that's important because primarily people that have sickle cell anemia live in Africa, and malaria is very prevalent in Africa. So if you have sickle cell anemia, you're not going to get malaria. Our second genetic disorder that we're going to cover is Down syndrome. What is it? It is a chromosome disorder. It also has another name. It is called trisomy 21. Trisomy means they have 3 copies of the chromosome. Usually you have 2 copies of the chromosome for all your traits, one from mom, one from dad. But in Down syndrome, for one of the chromosomes, they have 3 copies of the chromosome, and it happens on chromosome number 21. So out of the 23 pairs, the 21st pair, instead of having 2, they have 3. So they call that trisomy 21. It is not dominant, it is not recessive. So how is it inherited? It is caused by a mistake in meiosis. The chromosomes in anaphase are supposed to split, and the 21st chromosome doesn't do that. So it's called non-disjunction. Non-disjunction is a process, It's a mistake. It's a failure of those chromosomes to split in the anaphase of meiosis. And so that causes that third extra copy of chromosome number 21. You can see in the pictures, and we'll get to symptoms in the next slide, but you can see in the pictures that Down syndrome babies have a flattened nose, a flatter face, their eyes slant upward. You can see there's like a predominant single crease in their palm. Their fifth finger is a little bit shorter, and their fifth finger curves inward. That's their pinky. And on their feet, there's a huge space between the big toe and the next toe. And there's just more skin, like creases in them. And so typically when you see someone that has Down syndrome, it's pretty obvious that they have them. Like they have these distinct characteristics. All right, so for symptoms, the top 3 symptoms are low IQ. They have a severe mental retardation. Their IQ is lower. An average IQ, let's say, is 100. So their IQ can range to super severe, which is 25, and then maybe up to 50. So they can't go to a regular school. They would have to, stay at home and be homeschooled. Other symptoms are what I described earlier, is abnormal physical features. And they also have a problem with their heart. They have a heart defect. What is in the small font, you do not have to write down, but also I just wanted to mention. They're usually short. They have a larger tongue. They have weak muscles and a flat nose, which I showed you earlier in the picture. You can cross out or just put an X through the treatment. There is no treatment for Down syndrome. You have it. There's nothing you can do about it. You just have to live with it for the rest of your life. Another thing to know, though, in that box, please write that they have Down syndrome kids are more at risk for leukemia. Leukemia is cancer of the white blood cell. And they're more at risk for Alzheimer's, which is when you forget things when you're older. Our third genetic disorder is hemophilia. We did do genetic problems with hemophilia, so I briefly mentioned it. But now we'll go into more of the details. It is a bleeder's disease, which means they bleed spontaneously, abnormally. They can't stop their bleeding. You have clots. You have clots that need to form in your blood in order for blood to stop bleeding, and they do not. Their blood does not clot normally. It is inherited, as you know, from genetic problems, sex-linked, which means it's carried on the X chromosome, and it's recessive. So for a girl to have it, they would need to be X little h, and for a boy to have it, they would need to be X little h, y. 3 main symptoms: abnormal bleeding. Bleeding spontaneously, like out of the blue. And because of this bleeding, they get chronic, which means they get it a lot, arthritis. Other little side symptoms, their brain can hemorrhage. They can feel like they're going to throw up. Their pupil size is unequal, and they can get slurred speech. Treatment, similar to sickle cell anemia, they would have to go to a hospital to get a blood transfusion or injection. Other neat thing to know, and you can see from this pedigree that it runs in European royalty. So as you can see right here, Queen Victoria was a carrier. And she married King Albert, and they had so many kids, but you can see that their son, Leopold, had it. And so you can see through the generations how, see there's mostly boys, that's a sex-linked trait. Mostly squares are filled in because sex-linked traits are predominant in males. Girls are typically carriers and very rarely would get the disease. Our fourth genetic disorder is PKU. Yes, you need to know what PKU stands for. It stands for phenyl, keto, and then urea is the U. It is an enzyme disorder. It affects enzymes. Remember, enzymes are catalysts. They make chemical reactions go faster. We learned that back in semester 1. And what this enzyme that they do not have, they can't break down amino acids in protein. So if they eat protein is made of amino acids, that amino acid cannot be broken down, which it typically would in a normal person. They are missing that enzyme to be able to break those amino acids down, which causes a havoc in their body. It is just an autosomal recessive disorder. And so It is super expensive to get treatment and to get the correct foods that they need to eat, since they can't eat typical protein. And so you can see on the picture on the right of them doing some type of fundraiser. 3 symptoms. The amino acid, phenylalanine. There are 20 amino acids. Phenylalanine is one of them. That phenylalanine that they get from eating protein will accumulate, since they can't break it down, and it accumulates in the brain. And that's obviously not going to be good. It causes brain damage, and it causes them mental problems, mental retardation. Treatment, obviously, they can't eat a lot of protein, especially protein that contains phenylalanine. So they have to be on a low protein diet. You can see on the picture that they should stick in the yellow area. They should only be eating in their lifetime vegetables, fruits, very low protein breads and pastas, and juice. They should avoid anything in green, which is typical food: rice, pasta, corn, bread, french fries, hamburgers, peanut butter, potatoes, peas, and obviously very much so avoid anything in the purple. Other thing to know is that all newborns are tested for this. They test it, they prick their heel, which means they take a needle to their heel, and they're not just testing for, PKU, they're testing for other things as well. But one of the tests is the PKU test, and they need to start a special diet and special, formula if they have PKU, because it can affect their brain quickly. Our 5th genetic disorder is Turner syndrome. Turner syndrome is a disorder where it only occurs in girls. So if a girl gets it, they're called a Turner's girl. And what the problem is they are missing a sex chromosome. Girls are supposed to be XX. Well, in Turner syndrome, their karyotype is XO. And that O represents that there is no X. It's just an X. They don't have XX. It can be arranged, though. They can miss maybe just a piece of the X. Maybe they have a little portion. Maybe they have most of it. Maybe some of it, just a piece of it, the tip of it's missing. Or they can miss the entire thing. So there is a range. So Turner syndrome is a sex chromosome problem, where a girl is missing a part of or the entire X chromosome. Symptoms: they're very short. They're infertile, which means they're not going to be able to have kids. And they go through an abnormal puberty. Other side note symptoms you don't need to write down: they have heart problems. Their hands and feet look puffy, like swollen all the time. They have neck skin. So like normal skin is flat, their skin has like folds on their neck. They can have a hard time hearing, and they have a hard time with their weight. Treatment is hormones. So they would take maybe progesterone or estrogen, girl hormones, injections of those to help. You can cross off your other things to know box, because there is no other thing to know. But I did want to show you the karyotype for a female that has Turner syndrome. You can see the 23 pairs of chromosomes. If you look at the sex chromosomes, which is the 23rd pair, they are completely missing that X chromosome. So this is Turner syndrome. Our last disorder for this page is cystic fibrosis. It is a disorder that affects the pancreas. It's not just a pancreas, though, but they call it a pancreas disorder. But it also affects the lungs and the reproductive system. It is a recessive disorder, so that means you need 2 little c's, let's say, autosomal, to get cystic fibrosis. And they know through the genetic project, the human project for gene mapping, that it is on chromosome number 7 that affects for cystic fibrosis. Symptoms: no, typically when you're sick and you have to clear your throat, you kind of just, do that kind of thing because you have extra mucus in your throat. That's a normal person. You can spit it out and eventually it'll just go away. If you have cystic fibrosis, they have it all the time. They have extra mucus, excess, too much mucus in their lungs, too much mucus in their pancreas, and too much mucus in their reproductive system. And so all this mucus is sitting there, all this extra, juice and phlegm, and it sits there and it gets infected. And so that's what causes problems, and eventually problems in their lungs and in their organs. So because they're infected all the time, they get bronchitis and pneumonia, which you know isn't good, especially right now, over and over again. So they miss a lot of school if they were a teenager with this type of problem. Another symptom, and this is the way they test for it, is they have extremely salty sweat. So they'll do a sample for that, and they can test that salt content in the sweat, and they can diagnose cystic fibrosis. Treatment, because they're losing a lot of salt in their sweat, they want to take sodium supplements. They want to have a low-fat, high-protein diet. And because they're always sick with this, bronchitis and pneumonia and infections, they're always on antibiotics. Other things to know, they have to have this treatment. They have to have antibiotics. If you don't have antibiotics, it's just going to get out of control and they can die. Another treatment eventually is they would need to get a lung transplant because it does affect their lungs, and their lungs kind of just get worse and worse. And so, I think it's 20, 25 years they would need to have a lung transplant. All right, our 7th genetic disorder is Klinefelter syndrome, and this is the male version of the Turner syndrome. So it is a chromosome disorder, and it only happens in males. And so males' karyotype is XY, right? You have one X and one Y, they don't match. But in Klinefelters, boys, they have an extra X. So instead of being XY, their karyotype is XXY. So just thinking about it, having that X chromosome can cause some problems. For symptoms, they are typically tall. They have a small testes, which means that they produce little or no sperm at all. So that means they will not probably produce a child. They develop breasts because of that X chromosome during puberty. Other minor symptoms you do not need to write down. They have reduced body hair, and they end up with osteoporosis, which is a problem with their bones. Treatment is hormone injections like testosterone. You can see on the karyotype that they're, and this is also in your other box, when their cells are examined and they look at the karyotype, as they're looking and they see all these chromosomes nice in a row, they come across XX right here. So they are mistaken for a girl. But if they just moved a little bit farther, then they'll see that Y. So it's XXY, and that's Klinefelters. All right, our next genetic disorder is albinism. I'm sure you have heard of it before. It is a disorder where no melanin is a pigment that's in the skin, they don't produce melanin at all. So it is just a recessive autosomal genetic disorder, which means it's not sex-linked. It's just like little a. And you can see from the picture that they have, and this is their symptoms, they have white skin, white hair, no pigment in their eye, and they should not be in the sun. Symptoms, just like I said, white skin, white eyes, sometimes they look red, and white hair all over the body. Treatment, every time they go outside, whether it's cloudy or not, or the sun's out or not, they should have sunglasses on. They should be wearing sunscreen. They should be wearing protection over their skin because they can sunburn super easy. Other thing, and it's kind of cool, and you can see in the pictures, is that this doesn't just happen in humans, it happens in animals as well. So some beautiful effects of the disease on animals. Next disorder is breast cancer. It is an enlarged mass of cells in the breast tissue. Any cancer is that. It's an enlarged mass of cells in that area. Remember that cancers are named for the location of where the cancer starts. For breast cancer, though, it is dominant. It is a dominant cancer, and that's why it's so horrible. Because if you know someone in your family that has breast cancer, then most likely you have a super good chance of getting it because of the genetics. They know from all the breast cancer research that it is on chromosome 17. There's only one symptom, and it's basically a lump in the breast. For treatment, and this is treatment for any cancer, typically you can do chemotherapy, radiation, they can remove the breast, and I'm sure this fact is old, but it is 1 in 7,000 people get breast cancer. Our next genetic disorder is Marfan Syndrome. It is a muscle disorder. It affects the muscles. It is also a dominant genetic disorder. So if it runs in your family, you have a high chance of getting it. And they know from research that is on chromosome 15. As you can see in the picture, it affects like the muscles. In the spine, you can see that the spine is bent. It's a little bit different than like scoliosis, but similar. You can see how the curvature of the spine is affected. And that's due to the muscles, though. There are 4 symptoms to try and squeeze in your box. They have longer limbs. They have loose joints. They have a deformed vertebral column, which is their backbone. They have crowded teeth, so they have dental issues. And because their limbs are longer, it causes rupture of large arteries. Treatment, they should wear a back brace. They end up getting surgery on their spine, and they are just constantly going to the doctor. There is no cure. All right, our next genetic disorder is Taysachs. Taysachs is an enzyme disorder similar to PKU. In PKU, remember, they couldn't break down the amino acid that's in protein. Well, it's very similar. In Taysachs, they can't break down fat. So you can see in the picture that these lipids, that's fat, remember, and they get stored in vacuoles, and this happens in the brain. Even though it's not sex-linked, it is just a recessive genetic disorder, like little t. Boys mainly get it. 3 main symptoms: seizures, they're very irritable, they have a bigger head. Also, you don't have to write the minor symptoms. They have delayed mental and social skills. They have feeding difficulties. They have an abnormal skin color, loss of motor skills that eventually will go blind and deaf, and they just lose all intellectual skills. There is no treatment, no cure. The only thing you can do for them, because they'll die, usually, not necessarily by age 5. Sometimes they can live a little bit older, maybe into almost their teenage years. But there is no treatment. Well, the only thing you can do is just try to get them to be comfortable. And our last genetic disorder is Huntington's Disease. It is a degenerative brain disease, and you don't even know you have it until you're maybe in like the 50s, your age, in the middle age. And basically degenerative means that something is breaking down. In this case, it's your brain. Your brain tissue is just being lost. You can see in the picture that the normal brain is on the left, and you can see on the right that there is just more light, larger areas because the brain tissue, which is the darker area, is just being degraded over time. It is dominant, so if it runs in your family, you could easily get it, and they know from research it's on chromosome 4. 3 symptoms: mild mental problems, loss of motor control, so they'll eventually probably be in a wheelchair. They get very angry and depressed. Treatment: tranquilizers, and then just therapy, physical therapy and speech therapy. There is nothing in your other box. And that finishes our notes for genetic disorders.